Go ahead, David, to start, please.
Thank you so much, Dr. Hanadi, and I would like to start today saying that it's a real pleasure to be with such an international audience. I don't know that there's anyone else who have organized a conference like Dr. Hanadi have done for us this week, which has such a wide representation from ecosystems around the world. It's really an achievement, Dr. Hanadi, that you have been able to get so many experts here in place, all the way from Malaysia, where Safura is joining us in this session. It is 2 o'clock at night in Malaysia right now, AM, and we also have Pierre joining from Australia in pretty much the same time zone. We have in this session also David Fonseca calling in from Texas. We have Hilton Tønnesen calling in from Johannesburg, South Africa. And that is just this session. Think about all the other sessions throughout this conference with this representation. It is very special. And the other thing that I would like to say is that I appreciate about this conference that it is focused on practitioners. We are talking here about...
Thank you, David. All the time, I remind the people, we are not academic conference, we are practitioner conference who is building the infrastructures for the ecosystem.
Exactly. And that is what I really appreciate about this conference, and where we can really learn from each other in the face-to-face meetings with entrepreneurs, in the workshops that we are organizing, in the board positions that we take place, in the investments that we are making. It is all those practical actions that makes a difference to not only the businesses and to the investors, but to the ecosystems around the world. So what a wonderful opportunity for so many cultures and representatives to be together here today. So I am going to kick off the session, and then I am going to ask questions to some of the experts that we have on the panel here for the next hour or so. But I want to kick off today with something very practical. I want to talk about some of the things that is close to my heart and my business as well, which is really how advisors are working on a daily basis. And we have made a simple framework for our own understanding, and we hope it can be helpful for you as well. It is a framework that we are sharing with you and that you can use in your own organization. So let me just take this as a way to get a big picture of what's going on when you advise a business, whether you are in a university incubator, whether you are in a commercial incubator, an accelerator, maybe you are in a business support center, or even if you are in an investment company. So, one of the things that all of us are doing in practical life is that we are onboarding a client, an entrepreneur, someone is joining our program. And if you are in an accelerator, the onboarding might be where you get an application. And to make this in a good way, you got to make the right application. You have to answer the right questions. You need to make sure that the people who comes in have sufficient information about your program. So one of the questions we can ask ourselves is, how do we create 5-star onboarding processes so that anybody who enters our program gets received like you would be received in a 5-star hotel? Do they know you very well? Do they know your preferences? Do they know your needs? Do they make sure that you get through the right door, that you get the offerings that are relevant to you? So there's a whole lot of things about the onboarding process itself before you even let people into your program where there's room for improvements. And for Growthville as a technology company, we try to make software to improve that onboarding process, but it goes beyond the software. And any organization who's a practitioner and who's here today can ask themselves that question. What is it really that makes a good onboarding process? Now, once the client have gotten through the door and you start working with them as an investor, accelerator, incubator, or small business program, you need to assess the client's needs. And what's the best practice for that? How do you assess someone's needs? Well, there's a lot of ways to do that out there. Traditionally, we were asking for business plans. Today, not so many people do it anymore. They are very long. Nobody likes to write them. Nobody likes to read them. And they're old, obsolete, before they get started. There's also simple tools like SWOT analysis that may be too simple to assess a business. Today, we got tools like Business Model Canvas, which we think is great because it's holistic and it is visual and a simple tool. Others are making assessments through financial analysis. So maybe you find, if you are an investor, the way that you assess the client's needs is to go through their financials to really find out how you can make an assessment. And there are other tools out there. Growth Wheel is an example of a tool as well that can be used for assessment. So as we are designing our programs and are becoming better practitioners, we should ask ourselves, what is our tools for assessment? Are we using the best tools? Are we using the right technologies? And not just doing assessment by asking the question, how can I help you? What is your needs? We can do better than that with technologies that are there today, and it's for all of us to explore that further. The third step in the 6-step process for business advisors is to share tools and information. And this can be seen in a very broad way. These are things that you're already doing in your program if you are a practitioner. So you might be sharing YouTube videos or blog posts. Maybe you made your own tools. Maybe you're using Growth Wheel. Maybe you're using Business Model Canvas. But it goes beyond tools. Sharing tools also means sharing information resources. So there's all kinds of government resources that you can refer to. There are training sessions that people can join on live or in person. And sharing tools and information also include the all-important sharing of networks connections. So you know professional service providers like attorneys, accountants, investment brokers, and designers and others. And all the whole workflow of tool sharing involves making sure you have a library of tools, software services, network contacts, information resources of all kinds, and have the right way of sharing it. And for someone like us in Growth Wheel that are making software, we try to make software that can collect these resources and distribute them in our platform, which we're not going to talk about today, but there are many other ways than Growth Wheel that tool sharing can be done in an efficient way. Then also all business advisors has as part of their workflow to make action plans. And if you haven't worked and innovated the way you make action plans, you probably do it in email. So when you speak and work with a client, you finish off by writing an email that says something along the lines of, thank you for coming today. We have decided on the following 3 action steps. I look forward to follow up with you and see you again. Now, email might be the worst possible technology at all to make action planning in, because that email might get lost very easily. And if you're going to follow up with a client, you're going to have to dive into your inbox and find that email again at the next meeting. So there are many other systems that can be used for tracking action plans, for collaborating in the cloud. Growth Wheel is one of those systems, but there are others out there, like Asana or even a Google document if you must. So again, if we want as practitioners to make action plans for clients, we want to have a simple way of following up with them. We want to be able to collaborate with the client in the cloud. Then we need to look at this step in the workflow and see what we can improve. And then there's reporting. That is something all advisors do. Sometimes you report to your management. Sometimes you report to government. You may report to organization that has given a grant to your program, but you also may be reporting to your colleagues, and you may be reporting to the entrepreneur, and the entrepreneur might be reporting back to you how they are progressing on their ambitions or their financials or whatever it is. So reporting, collecting of data, small data that turns into big data, data that are used in different contexts for decision making, is a key part of what we do as practitioners. So again, we must explore technologies. What is the best way to track data? What is the best way to distribute data? We want to have them handy. We want to have dashboards that provide this information for us so we can improve our service. And then the last 6th step in the workflow of most business advisor is the relationship management. Throughout onboarding, assessment, tool sharing, action planning, and reporting, and going back through that loop again, there's a lot of relationship management going on. This means tracking information like demographics of the client, phone numbers, emails that are sent, meeting minutes, meeting appointments, scheduling meetings, and all those things that you have in a CRM system. typically. Now, some organizations in the entrepreneurial ecosystem don't even have CRM systems. Some have CRM systems that are legacy systems that are very obsolete. Some pick standard solutions that are supposed to be CRM systems for everybody. So what you might be looking for is custom systems that are built for the industry. And you might be looking for CRM systems that are client-facing. What does that mean? Well, many organizations have a CRM system that is internal. It's a backend. It's just for you. But you may want to consider have a CRM system where clients can log in, so it is effectively a platform to collaborate in the cloud and not the closed backend system. Because if the client have access to the CRM system, they can provide the information, they can update the data, so you don't have to be the administrator doing that. So that is just my introduction here today. Before I introduce our speakers, this is a generic workflow, and we have made a little infographic here with this workflow. No matter what organization you have, regardless of whether you're using GrowthWheel as your CRM system and remote counseling platform, this can be an inspiration for innovation in our industry and in your program, whatever program you are making. And it has a little summary of some of the things that I spoke about here. So you can use this to systematically analyze how you can innovate the program that you are having today. So with that, I want to open up for a few questions for this before I will introduce our next speaker here today. So let me just take my slides down right there and see if there's any questions in the chat, or if anybody wants to unmute and ask a question or share a comment, feel welcome to do that right now. If not, then keep your questions on the ready as we move on. I would like to introduce David Fonseca, calling in from Velocity in Texas. And actually, David, I'm going to hand it straight over to you and ask you to tell everybody a little bit about the work that you do, and especially emphasize how you work as a practitioner, which is the defining theme of our conference here today.
Thank you, David. It is an honor to be here today with you guys. I love the diversity. I love all the countries that are present today. And it's just an honor to be able to share, the stage, if you will, with you and the rest of the folks. I serve as the Executive Vice President for a not-for-profit organization called Velocity Texas. We operate an innovation center that is the only one of its kind here in San Antonio, Texas. And our job is to actually help companies that have innovative breakthroughs in the medical device world. And what do? We connect them, we support them, and we invest on them. Those three things. So for the last 4 years, as a practitioner, I've spent a lot of time thinking about what is the best way to do that. And the best way to do that is first finding the best ones. We don't want to be in the babysitting business. We don't want to be asking people to do what they're supposed to be doing, but rather focusing on growing companies. That's what we call venturing. So what we have is we have a program called the Bioglobal Accelerator. We're in 5 countries right now: Chile, Brazil, Colombia, Costa Rica, and the United States. And we help through partnerships the best innovations, breakthroughs in medical device. And what I mean by that is we have a selection process. This year alone, we had 142 applications. We selected the top 6, and we put them through a 16-week program. So as a practitioner, David, there is a lot of coaching, a lot of mentorship, a lot of curriculum development we have to do. And we have found out that, your tool, GrowthWheel, is probably one of the most high impact activities that we have performed in our Velocity Center. And I'll tell you what, and I tell you why. We only have limited amount of time, 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, regardless of where you're from, regardless of your demographics, race, or geographical location. But at the end of the day, what makes us different between, productive and not that highly productive people is high impact activities. And with GrowthWheel, we have been able to identify with a short period of time what those high impact activities are. And that's why we have selected 4 entrepreneurs in residence that get paid by Velocity to do the coaching for our client companies using GrowthWheel. As a practitioner, we have helped our incubator clients by giving them access to mentors. And if you use Growth Wheel, you will see that we actually have an assessment where there is a skills gap, where we can identify what type of gaps there are within the company and within the framework of the executive team, so we can make appropriate introductions that can move the needle for the company. Before then, David, just to close it up, I mean, I've spent over a decade running, incubators, angel networks, accelerators, and I was honored to actually help an association called International Business Innovation Association, which I sit in the board, but before we were training people globally on how to run successful incubators and accelerators. So as a practitioner, I'm very passionate about being in front of you guys. I'm very passionate about sharing best practices, but most importantly, things that haven't worked for us, because smart people learn from other people's mistakes, but geniuses learn from others. So, and I'm not very smart. I'm not the smartest one in the room. So I'm here to share some mistakes that we have made that have made us think things differently and more efficiently and more productive. Thank you, David.
Yes, thank you so much, David. It is really a pleasure to have you here. So let's try to dive in and talk maybe about some specific cases, a situation that you have been in. Can you give an example of a situation where you had a particular challenge with a client and where you had an approach that kind of resolved that into a success? So maybe, for example, since you are in the medical device area, you may have a challenge where there's some compliance issues and the client was stuck on that one, and maybe you had a technique, a tool, an approach that kind of resolved it. Or maybe, as you've been working, of course, with many Latin American companies, I know, maybe they had a challenge with the nature of breaking into a new market like the United States. And they had this challenge, it was hard. Somehow you applied a technique, a tool, an approach that made that happen. Or maybe you have an example of a company that couldn't get financing and was struggling with that. And you applied a technique or a tool or something that made this instead into a positive experience. Could you share with the audience today an example of a challenge and how you actually broke through with a solution?
Yeah, I'm fascinated by your question, because when we bring best practices from the United States into Latin America, I'm originally from Colombia, but we do work across Latam. We talk about, tropicalizing the concept of things that we're doing. But when you actually bring concepts from Latin America into the United States, you talk about detropicalizing the concepts. So I have a very good example, I think, to share with you. I hope you enjoyed it. And it's, we were helping this company called Book to Fly. This company is a 4-year-old company. They operate in 8 different countries, and they serve companies that are booking for other folks, which does how you call that? I just blank on the name of they serve. Their audience in Latin America is serving. How you call when you call somebody to book the flight for you? I just blank on that.
A booking agency, a travel agency.
A booking agency, yes. So we have many booking agencies across Latin America, and that's their main customer. Well, the fact is that these booking agencies, travel agencies is the word that I was trying to use. These travel agencies actually are very big and apparent across Latin America because they are in compliance with government funding. Usually government fundings rely on them to be compliant. Well, when you come to the United States, there are no travel agencies. So actually, when you come here, there are few, I'm not going to say none, but there are few that actually work with the government, but the big bulk of the travel booking for big corporation is done in-house. So you have big credit cards that actually provide this as a service. You have big airlines providing this as a service. So the whole concept with Felipe Viana, the CEO and founder of this company, was how can we detropicalize this company to come and add value? And the story was pretty remarkable because we were able to change the model from a B2B concept to a B2C concept, where we actually created a white label solution so we can track the expenses that our executives are expending. When you have a corporation, you experience it probably in your company, David, you spend a lot of money in travel, but sometimes you don't have a grip on policies that should be in place to control these expenses. And we were attacking that specific issue in companies, because it turns out that you can save up to 62% of the expenses if you track them. You cannot manage what you cannot track, right? So we were able to create a white label, and nowadays it's being used by many small businesses in the United States to be able to provide their regulations and
Yes,
policies
sir.
to small businesses.
Yeah, what's going on from you, man?
Thank you.
Sorry, someone was just unmuted. It usually is the other problem that we are muted and we are asked to be unmuted. So yes, that is great. So I guess, David, to finish off before we move to the next speaker here, the technique you applied, it sounded like you were really questioning the entire business model for this particular company, right? To come up with that innovative new approach for them to enter the market?
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And I start questioning, what was their internationalization strategy in terms of how they wanted to attack the market. And in fact, you have a beautiful section in your growth wheel that talks about internationalization and the platform that they should use for internationalization. And a reseller, a distributor, and in this case was a white label solution and a B2B SaaS model, a B2C SaaS model that we could, help and assist other customers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for your time today, David Fonseca from Velocity in Texas. And please stay with us, as we may have time for some interaction and discussion here later on. And then I want to bring it on to our next speaker, Hilton Tønnesen from South Africa, based in Johannesburg in South Africa. Hilton, welcome to you.
Hey, thank you, David, and greetings to everyone from whichever time zone you are. And I see a good friend here, Martin, from Amsterdam as well. So I agree with you. I jumped from the pool. It's very hot in Johannesburg, and now here I am. So, we live in different times. And of course, this is what technology does, and this tool called Zoom. So it's cool to be here, and thank you. Hope to share a few things about Africa and what we do in the continent.
Yes, and I look forward to ask you some questions about that. First of all, I must say I was really amused by David Fonseca's term of tropicalization and detropicalization, as you have companies that moves into foreign markets. So I've been thinking, what would you call that if someone is entering the South African market or going out of the South African market to another place? So maybe we can think about that during this presentation. And the same for Malaysia. What would it mean to Malaysiify a product or a service, or de-Malaysiify or something like that? Maybe up in the Nordics, where I'm from, Denmark, it would be frosting or defrosting, at least in the winter time. But anyway, Hilton, I want to start out, if you would share a little bit with the audience, what makes you a practitioner in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in South Africa?
I think I'll maybe take that a little bit wider, and talk about Africa, because our focus as in the region is to contribute to, GDP and enable an ecosystem. We have a great saying that it takes a village, to grow a child, and in the same way, it takes a village and a collaborative village to grow the African entrepreneurship ecosystem. And so as Growth Wheel South Africa, we've pinned ourselves into that kind of, big goal to bring Africa, over the next couple of years into the global ecosystem. And of course, now we've had COVID and we've had an opportunity to almost do things, because we couldn't get, lots of people couldn't travel to Africa. And that was a great opportunity. Over the last number of years, the hot topic is almost similar to David, is that we have the Africa Free Trade Agreement. And the free trade agreement will create around $2.5 trillion of GDP to the globe, to the African continent. And so therein lies the opportunity for practitioners to play a role in growing the entrepreneurs that we would want to see create a well-being economy in the context of Africa. By 2050, the population, which is somewhere around 1.3 billion, will be 2.5 billion people. And so what does that mean in the context of, practitioners that helps entrepreneurs take the ideas and commercialize them, and then play a role within global economics. And everybody say, this is the frontier market. This is where things will happen in the next 20, 30 to 40 years. And I think this is very critical for ecosystem builders, that now that we've moved from the industrial age and the knowledge economy, and now we need, information technology, innovation economy, things will change. And so we see ourselves as part of that within the South African and the African ecosystem. And so, I, for example, saw that in Kuwait, very small population, similar to Denmark, it is a booming ecosystem of incubators and accelerators, and a massive fintech community there. In Africa, we have about 700 and odd tech hubs, about 300 and odd similar incubators and accelerators in the South African economy. The challenge is that 9 out of 10 startups fail within the first 3 years. And so we've got to ask ourselves as ecosystem builders, what is it that we need to have? What kind of lingo that we have to have in place? And of course, standards. And then of course, your resources, like Growth Wheel, that fits into that ecosystem. In the context of Africa, we have a lack of data. So we always pull things out from there. And as you now have, aware that, Growth Wheel as a cloud platform, and if I can give a case study of Africa, or South Africa, where we've partnered with the South African government, we had a kind of a wild west of ecosystem builders or business advisors and incubators and accelerators and mentors and coaches and management consultants and business advisors. Sometimes they put this thing into one, and those are 7 or 8 different disciplines. In a similar way, everyone isn't an entrepreneur. Some of us are just business owners, and so there's also confusion around that. So the tools and the techniques and the knowledge that you need to have as an ecosystem builder is quite a complex one, David.
Yes, so this is really interesting, because I think as business advisors and practitioners, we cannot not work with technology companies. You mentioned the fintech industry, and there's so many other technology industries. And what would be our advice? What would be our advice to not only technology companies, but any companies? That would be for them to focus on technology. Right? We want them to focus on cloud-based solutions, collecting big data, make sure that their technology is mobile, make sure that their data can be interchanged through APIs with other systems and all those things. That's the advice any advisor would give. And I would say even someone who has a bakery, that's a technology business today, because they got to blog about the warm bread in the morning on Instagram, and they got to take credit cards through a credit card reader, and they got to take pre-orders so people can book online, and so on. So all businesses are technology companies today. So if we are advising our clients to use the best technologies that are available at this point, what about ourselves? What are the kind of technologies that advisors are using? So what is your perspective on that, Hilton, that the digitalization of the advisor industry itself?
It starts with policy. They say that that we do need leadership in this particular ecosystem, and I think we're evolving, and as an ecosystem of business advisors and mentors and coaches and management consultants, we've really kind of worked at the corporate sector. Now we see that there's 800 million small businesses around the world, employing 87% of global population. Now, this is data that we, as business advisors, kind of build our businesses on. And we always talk to entrepreneurs about having data to make decisions, right? But I find that on our ecosystem is that we are slow to change, right? Particularly in South Africa, your kind of average business advisor, mentor, consultant, is quite wisdom aged, if you like, and so they've evolved with technology. But over the last 5 years, we've seen, for example, with the cloud, that things has just propelled, right? And so I think it's keeping yourself up to date with what's happening around the world. All of our lives, particularly in the kind of business advisory coaching sector, has been disrupted because we used to have a group of entrepreneurs into one classroom, right? And we were relying on that kind of, engagement when I'm sitting next to you and etc. And now this has changed, right? And so we've seen, for example, in the business advisory and the coaching, leadership coaching, and business mentorship sector, that these guys' revenues and opportunities has actually gone down because they were too slow to react to, where technology has gone. And I think, for example, for the Kuwait ecosystem, where there's kind of big broadband and etc. And I believe somewhere around third or fourth within EMEA, the fastest growing startup ecosystem, that, the sector needs to look at digitalization and specifically around collaboration. There's a new word that we've introduced, we like it here in South Africa, which is co-opetition. And so how do you compete? You compete, but collaborate with other incubators and accelerators so that when the entrepreneur or the startup goes from one phase, life stage to another, that, his data travels with him the same way that it travels on Facebook or Instagram. And all of us as ecosystem builders or resource partners don't duplicate what the other organization has done. And I think, therein lies the opportunity around digitalization as well, David.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Hilton, for joining today and for sharing these perspectives and for emphasizing the importance of technology. And that brings us through a corridor to Malaysia, because one of the first time I visited Malaysia was at the time when they launched the Malaysia Multimedia Super Corridor. At the time it was called Multimedia. Today it would be called something else. But it really goes to show that Malaysia has always been focused on this since the dawn of the internet. So Safura, I want to hand it over to you, and I know you have prepared a presentation for us. So I will leave it to you to move on here, share your screens, and talk to us more about your perspectives from Kuala Lumpur.
All right. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Ahlan wa sahlan. Kaifa haluk? Ismi Safura. I'm Safura. That's the little bit of Arabic I know. I will learn Arabic when I was in secondary school. I passed because I used the word Wallahu alam. So I get points for that. Means only God knows. So again, thank you for the opportunity to be here, to be sharing about the perspective from a Malaysian ecosystem builder, a practitioner point of view. So just a bit of background of me. I have been in the ecosystem, I believe around 20 odd years, although I don't look it. I like to think I'm perpetually 17. The thing is that what I'm sharing today, I'll be zooming out first to look at Malaysia as a whole, and on what about entrepreneur development in Malaysia. Then I will zoom into the challenges that we face building the ecosystem in Malaysia. And I'll also showcase a proposed project that we're doing at the moment, utilizing innovation and technology that we have available to us. So Malaysia itself, just to share a snapshot from the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor, this is the most recent report on Malaysia itself, because we stopped, I believe, 2019, we no longer participate in the research. But what you could see here, that we are efficiency driven. And Malaysia has been talking about entrepreneurship development since, I think, 1950s. Even in the 1950s, we were already talking about developing entrepreneurship ecosystem in tandem with Korea, in actual fact. We were together with Korea when we talk about our entrepreneurship development. But look where Korea is at this point of time compared to Malaysia. Of course, there are contexts to the situation. There are scenarios that makes us different, but there are similarities that I like to point out. So the challenge that we face here is that if you look in the radar itself, that we're pretty much average overall. We're pretty happy, happy and satisfied, or rather I would say. So if we compare to our nearest competitor, I would say competitor, which is Indonesia. Okay, if you look at Indonesia, let's look at the Global Entrepreneurship Monitor of Indonesia, of relative the same time. The difference between the green line and the blue line. The green line is average in Asia Pacific, Asia and Oceania, and the blue line is the country itself. So Malaysia is actually quite close to the green line compared to Indonesia, which has a lot of facilities, a lot of things happening that makes them go beyond the green line. So this is when we're talking about physical infrastructure, social norms, finance, government intervention, looking at how the ecosystem is at that particular country. So the challenge that we have in Malaysia is that we've been, as I said, since 1950s, talking about entrepreneurship ecosystem building, but we are very conventional. We look at the element of market access, funding, infrastructure, and training. These main 4 elements is very prevalent in our Malaysian plan. But the challenge again is that we've been doing the same thing over and over again, but expecting different results. Okay, we created a Ministry of Entrepreneur Development, which stopped in 2009. And we said, democratize entrepreneur development, let everybody do it. And then now, recently, we started the Ministry of Entrepreneur Development and Cooperation. That's what we call it at this point of time. So the question would be, are we doing things differently, or are we still doing the same thing, expecting different results? So just a short note, I was part of the government doing the intervention in what we call the National Institute of Entrepreneurship in Malaysia. It's called INSCAN. So I was one of them who actually looked at the policy to see how we could do it differently. And this is where, in actual fact, I discovered Growth Wheel. But now I'm on my own with Stratnavigo, because government, I love the government, but I think I move faster when we are private. I think we can move the agenda in a different way. So just again to share, if you talk about SMEs establishment from the numbers, majority are SMEs. And in Malaysia, micro is the biggest number. And this is, I think, quite general with any country. But the challenge is that Malaysia, we spend a lot of money doing the 4 things I mentioned: market access, funding, infrastructure, and training directly from the government to the entrepreneur, with the expectation that the micro would scale to the small and medium. But as it shows in the trend, is not happening as quickly as we want it to happen. So one of the things that we talked about when I started, when I was working with INSCAN, was to look at how do we do things differently. So one of the key element that I thought would make a difference is the business advisor, is having a platform where you would have these entrepreneurs, what we call a sounding board. Because training stops when the trainer says, all the best, see you in the next session. But the actual work happens when the entrepreneur goes to the floor and do his business. So in Malaysia, that's the challenge. We don't have enough people with sufficient knowledge. That's the first challenge, of really guiding, helping, coaching the entrepreneurs to scale. And when we talk about that, it's pretty much, the process. Because to me, when we talk about entrepreneurship, we can't do it a factory method. You put in your raw material, you process it, and out you go. You get an entrepreneur. Rather, we have a process, but the content is up to the entrepreneur himself. So how do we create that? And to me, the best platform is to have sufficient, business coaches, advisors. And second, technology. because we want all the advisors and the coaches to speak the same language. So in order to do that, you need to have a system. And that's where, you know, one of the discoveries that I had, and I was looking around, I was saying, if there's none in the world, I want to create one. And this was 2015. And I discovered, you know, one of them was Growth Wheel. And this is my first engagement with Growth Wheel as a platform to align the business coaches. So that's pretty much what I, you know, look at. And again, as here, I will show you, you know, the number of SMEs, the breakdown of it, manufacturing, construction, and services is the bulk of it in Malaysia, okay? And so what did I come up with? One is that we need to develop business coaches, because that's the human side of entrepreneurship development. We can't just rely on technology alone. We need to also have the people to be able to carry out the agenda. So to me, one of the things that we needed to look at is the capability of the business advisors as coaches, because we can't rely to them to be just mentors, because mentors are my way or the highway, right? Coaches is empowering the entrepreneurs to use their CPU, their brains, to come up with their innovative and creative solution. So the coaches are good at the process, but the content comes from the entrepreneur. So the challenge in Malaysia, and I'm going like a speed bullet in 3 o'clock in the morning, the challenge in Malaysia is the quality of business coaches, you know, and the language. So for me, when I was in ISCAN, one of the proposals that I had is to develop a pool of business coaches from multiple industry, either they're trainers, consultant, or practitioner, entrepreneurs themselves, and create sort of like the certification of the same language. So my proposal pretty much, you know, in tandem that we're proposing at this point of time with some government agencies at this point of time, and we actually have initiated is, and I'm going to share this one, is to have certified business coaches utilizing a platform. Because we have now what we call Dasar Keusahawanan Nasional. It's a national policy 2030, where we want in 2030 Malaysia to be an entrepreneurial state. But the challenge again, yes, 2 minutes. Okay, the challenge is that when we look at the ecosystem, there's no mention about business coaching. There's no real mention about developing the people who are supposed to be supporting the ecosystem. So for that, you know, okay, fine, the policy is out there, but what we like to do is let's just do it. So Safura is saying through Stripe and we go use Growth Wheel, come up with a coaching certification program where you start off for those who has no coaching certification to go through a 5-day coaching certification, you know, essential coaching, understanding how to use the strategic tools, and go on to, if they have a choice, they want to use Growth Wheel as a platform, and you know, go on to become a certified Growth Wheel advisor. Why? Because don't recreate the wheel for me. You know, I would love to have, you know, Safura wheel, but it's going to take time. Might as well we leverage on something which is already there, you know, and collaborate like what Hilton was talking about. You know, we collaborate to make the ecosystem better. So just to share, one of the proposals that we have working with an agency is to, you know, utilizing the 6 steps shared by David just now, where we actually have a 4-phase program. We do preliminary assessment, we do alignment, we do development, and then we do monitoring and achievement. Utilizing, you know, we're talking about gap, and we're talking about assessment, and then we're talking about modules and workshop, and then we monitor. And at that same time, we're using the platform in order to be able to measure the effectiveness of the money that's been invested into the project. So with that, that's a Malaysian, you know, perspective from me as a practitioner, and the agenda that I want to drive for Malaysia entrepreneurship ecosystem building. With that, back to you, David.
Thank you so much, Safura. This framework, I think, is hugely inspiring, and I hope that you would be so generous as to share with anybody who may contact you through VOVA, so you can get this framework. And thank you for emphasizing the importance of actually training the coaches. We cannot assume that anyone coming in as a business coach have the qualifications and background to do this. So having on a national scale a program, a standard for training advisors is a really important point as we discuss the ecosystem. Now, going to Australia next here on our route from New York, where I'm based, to Texas, to South Africa, Malaysia. We're now going down to Australia. And here I'm happy to introduce Pierre Lilly, who certainly is someone who's a very experienced business coach, an author as well. And Pierre, I'm going to leave it over to you to kick off your presentation. Thank you for being here at this hour.
That's okay. Thank you very much. And good morning to everybody here from Australia. I'm very pleased to be part of this, and thanks to Dr. Hanadi for arranging this one. This is probably the first time I've been on a global platform, so I might be cool, but my knees are shaking a little bit. What I'd like to do is just set the context. We have had a very dramatic COVID-19 experience here in Australia. We have more or less been in deep freeze for the last 20 months. We have had no international travel for 20 months, or very limited. All our states have more or less been closed. And we have therefore pushed a lot of people online, but also a lot of people have been very much challenged, so to speak, in actually adapting to this COVID. And some people are going down, we know that. We are people struggling. And of course, also being a private practitioner, there's not been a lot of people that say we need expensive coaching at this particular point in time because they are looking at their cost structure. So what I'd like to take a leaf out of is what David talked about in this 6 steps, where we talk about doing the assessment. I think very, very much now that we are coming out of the COVID pandemic, so to speak, when we are working with companies, we really need to deep dive into where do we find these optimistic views, so to speak. Where do we find the vehicle for moving forward? And I will see if I can share my screen here. Can you see that screen? Okay, so this is what I call a business audit, and this is really based on, say, we want to really go down into using growth wheel to fulfill what growth wheel is there to do, an objective of making decision, the right decision, and also the right actions. Principally, it's around, I'll just go on back, around of 20 focus areas that we are using as a checklist. And when we are doing that, we use what we call our 360-degree screening. Now, this is very important because you will know that many business owners and also entrepreneurs have a little bit of a tunnel vision. They know or think their own way. But what we're really doing with this 360-degree screening in 3 different stages is to debrief them and also probably challenge them to come up with what will be the way forward as we want to develop a strategic plan for them. So the first part is really assessing the status. And this is really how far have you come in developing your dream business? Are there missing pieces that we need to address? We go through these 20 focus areas and we find out where are the focus that we need to have. And then they have to be laid out in this screening. And from this screening, you can then decide, here example of addressing your product portfolio, there might be missing components here. Or you might say, well, we need to accelerate branding so we get a better profile in a competitive environment. The second part is really say, okay, let's look at the business again and do a little bit of a heat map. Where are these opportunities that we can take advantage of short term? Are there any low-hanging fruit that we can take advantage of in the short term, or actually almost at the same? Again, do the screening, assess each of the 30 focus areas, and then decide which of them you want to address as you move forward. And then finally, I think Hilse talked very much about competencies. It is very much so that many smaller and medium companies are relying on, let's say, the one spearhead of the entrepreneur. But as we move forward, of course, in growing a business, we need to add skill sets into the or skill competencies. And this is very important. And this is sometimes when I work with both the smaller or medium-sized business is something that we fail to look at. What do we need to add in form of skills, either by training or by adding resources or hiring people to ensure we remain competitive as we move forward. And all of that, of course, will then you'll then develop a plan. You say, well, these are the activities that we need to go through to ensure that we are caught 360 degrees by the status, how far we come in developing the company. Second part, where are the low-hanging fruits that we can take advantage of really soon? And of course, then what are the missing skills that we need, or core competencies that we need to develop to ensure that we remain competitive as we move forward. And you can see this is really a good example of a deep dive into a company that might have lost a little bit of the bearing in this COVID-19 to get them kind of raised up again and let them move forward to develop their business. So that was my short presentation of a business growth audit.
Thank you so much. And whether anyone is using Growth Wheel or not, I think the very idea of a growth audit is just so inspiring. I'm sure many of us, as soon as we just hear the word, we start thinking about how could we make our own growth audit or be inspired by what Pierre have presented here today. So we still have 10 minutes left in this session. So I kind of want to open up the floor for any of the panelists to comment on anything that you have seen, that's something that was said in the presentation, and anybody else here who's signed in as a presenter. If you want to share a perspective or a comment, feel free to do that, and maybe we can also have in the chat even questions from the conference audience here today. So does anyone have a comment to share or a question maybe to ask to any of our panelists here, truly covering all around the world, from all around the world? All right, then maybe I will go back to our first panelist, David, and ask you from your perspective, when you look at some of the things we have addressed here, which would you say is something that you would make a priority in the part of the ecosystem that you are in? Would you focus on the advisor training, and even in your own organization that Sephora spoke about, making sure that everybody here is trained? Would you look at the digitalization that Hilton spoke about, and how we as an ecosystem must also think about our own digitalization? Are you inspired by Pierre's concept of actually making an audit here, or would there be any of these things? If you were to pick one, what project, if you had time for one more project, which of these directions would you say you would go first?
Well, David, under the basis that we're all in the same business, regardless of what institution we are, which is helping entrepreneurs, because the entrepreneurs are the ones that are leading, and we're just supporters of those entrepreneurs. I think standardizing the way we help companies will be a huge, path forward. At one point, we tried to do it probably 3 years ago, but leadership in those institutions have changed, and I think it's about time to go back and actually talk the same language, because once we share clients, or once we try to connect folks speaking the same language, will just make much more sense, and us will be able to have much more quality of discussion with leaders across the entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Right. Thank you so much. All right, I want to finish up with one last perspective on our ecosystem and a practitioner that relates to this conference itself. Because you may remember that 2 years ago, it would be hard to comprehend a conference like this. We would not be here on Zoom, and the very suggestion that we could meet and have a conference on Zoom for several days in a row would be very foreign. Now it's very natural, and we have these coming up all the time, and we were able to switch and innovate very fast. Now here's my challenge for everyone who's present today in your ecosystem, which is to consider this technology for developing new programs for entrepreneurs. When we can meet this way as advisors, we could also create communities for our clients, the entrepreneurs that we are all working for them to come together. The same way it would be incomprehensible to bring together advisors from Malaysia and Kuwait and Australia and Denmark and Latin America and South Africa and the rest of the world. It is now possible. We just have to embrace this thinking of what we're doing now and consider how we can help our ecosystems by bringing them together much more. So imagine this conference was for entrepreneurs, or imagine we reinvent it. Maybe it's not a conference. Maybe it's a series of workshops where we all bring our clients together and give them the gift of international collaboration. This is something that can be used for export, finding clients in other markets, but it's also something that can be used to just learn from each other, learn the best practices as we have been doing today, and as I hope you have been doing through this session. So thank you so much once again. We had David from Velocity in Texas, Pierre Lilly from Pro Business Consulting in Australia, Safura Atan from Stratnavigo in Malaysia, Hilton Turnison from Growthwheel in South Africa, and myself, I'm the founder and CEO of Growthwheel. I'm going to put my contact information in the chat. If anybody wants to continue this conversation, there's my direct email. I check all my mails, I respond to all my emails. You can also reach out to me on LinkedIn. And with that, once again, Dr. Hanadi, thank you so much for having us here for the session today.
Thank you, David. Thank you for your sessions and running these sessions with your groups. Just I need to comment one point. In your statement, you said this conference collaborate different people from different countries. In fact, in the United States or in all developed countries, they're using the virtual surfaces worldwide in regular basis, because as you know, for example, the United States, there are different cities, and to cutting the cost and saving the time and bridging the technology, then they doing all their works, meetings, everything, it's virtual. Then this conference is a continuation for fostering the virtual conferences or virtual surfaces. Specifically, we are focusing on innovation ecosystem and entrepreneurial ecosystem. Then the most important things, implemented the best tools and strategies and technique who is fostering really the innovation ecosystem and entrepreneurial ecosystem.
Absolutely.
Thank you, David. Thank you.
Thank you back, Dr.
Hi,
Hanadi.
Professor Michael. How are you?
Well, Hanadi, it's always a pleasure to see you.
Thank you so much, Professor Mike. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take over. So this is session 6. This is very interesting. Innovative approaches to teaching and entrepreneurship, teaching entrepreneurship and creativity. I know when I'm teaching any courses in entrepreneurship, what I find is the most difficult challenge is getting the students to get into the mindset of an entrepreneur. And it's certainly much different than somebody who works in a company. An entrepreneur realizes that really, when it comes down to it, everything is on them. There's some times when I teach the students, you just have to learn how not to take no for an answer, even when there seems to be roadblocks in front of you. So I'm very anxious to get started with this session and see what kind of innovative approaches people have been able to come up with to teach entrepreneurship. And creativity, as you know, is an extremely important part of entrepreneurship. Solving problems oftentimes requires some very creative solutions. So if there's ways we can help students to learn how to be in that entrepreneurial mindset, I think it's very valuable. So we have 6 papers, so 5 papers rather. Each one is allowed 10 minutes. So try to be mindful of the time. I may start waving at you as you get close to the 10-minute mark to make sure that we don't run over. So let's get started if we can with the first paper. And if I mispronounce somebody's name, I apologize. So the first paper is Grace Hisaya. I'm assuming that's how I pronounce that. She's co-founder and CEO of Warmaloo Company, and that's in Cranes, Detroit. So is Grace here?